This is Writer Life, a podcast about writing, life, coffee and conversation with Rob and John Morgan.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Writer Life. As you can see by the title of the episode, tonight I want to talk about One World, Many Lives. And this episode has been it's sort of come about because recently I found something that I'd started to write over 10 years ago. I mean, to be honest, I cannot really remember why I actually began to write, this document that I found recently. But when I rediscovered this a few days ago and I read it, I could already see that, a long time ago, I was already starting to notice the changes in the world and starting to document it. I kind of like this little piece. It doesn't really fit anywhere in any of the other writing I've done, but I kind of liked the bit that I wrote, which is probably why I saved it. Maybe back then I felt it was important and worth keeping. So this is what I actually wrote. There are two ways of being, and you're caught in the middle of both, which I feel is part of the problem of why you feel so unsettled. Ultimately, you will need to choose how you want to live and who you want to be. There is the world asleep. Now this is the world you were raised in. It is the world of those who are blind to the truth of life. They worship money and power and will stop at nothing to acquire as much as they can. This is the world that pays no heed to the feelings of others. If anything, the people of this world live by the rules of society in public. But behind closed doors they lie and they cheat. They gossip and envy everybody. They have little morality and break all of the rules of life to please themselves. They care little for others and place themselves far above all of the others, demanding more and more of what they can get for themselves. They are fake and selfish people who will bring down mankind. 99% of the people you know may belong to this group. Alternatively, there is the world of the awoken. Now this is my world. A world where we do not blindly accept everything we are told. We seek truth and knowledge for the better of everyone. We are the carers, the creators of things. Honesty and truth is the path that we walk. As we are wide awake and we understand that many of the practices of the old are the key to the future of everyone. We recognize that we are free, enlightened spirits who live within the confines of a flesh body. We understand that to love and show love is the greatest asset of mankind, for it breeds peace and unity, and it improves the lives of all that it touches. We understand we are all connected to all things in this life, and we treasure all life and life forms. We understand the grace of the power of nature, and that there is no single entity that is better than the other, as all life is dependent on all other life forms. We are open-minded, deep thinkers, and share our creativity with the world around us. We shun the materialistic world and all its labels of superiority. We seek the truth and commune naked in nature. The rules of man do not apply to us, and we live by the mantra of live as you please, but harm no other. We're called many names: hippie, bohemian, pagan, dropout, weirdo, bum, idiot, or mentally disturbed. We see that other realms exist by ours, and at times they overlap, and we have no fear as we treat all spirit life as we do our own, and we recognize it as equal. We care, and we're often ridiculed for it, but it does not stop us, for it is our belief that we must love and care for all that we meet. To live in either world requires thought, and it's up to you to choose which one appeals the most. Whatever your choice, it's up to you to be bold and embrace the life that you pick. In each case, you should be open about your lifestyle and fully embrace it. If you do not, and you do try to hide it, you'll find yourself conflicted with a loss of focus, and that leads to unhappiness and anxiety. Each person who chooses how they want to live selects the way in which they will embrace their lifestyle and choice, with some of it more obvious. With others, it is not so obvious. The one rule that does apply here is if you make a choice to skip between the two, that too will lead to discontentment and unhappiness. You can only live one life, one way. So choose carefully and then fully embrace the choice that you make. I cannot say that I'm at all sure where my mind was when I actually wrote it, but it's very clear to me that at that time I was starting to note how quickly things were changing and how life appeared as if it was being separated and creating two distinct ways of living. Those who craved the attention and money, and those who were interested in a much more humanistic approach to their own lives. I cannot help but kind of feel echoes of Heirs to the Kingdom here, where I divided the world into two specific camps, the woodland realm and the realm of stone. And I do think that this really does kind of fit that narrative. And maybe that's where my mind was when I wrote this originally. I just cannot remember. I mean, I write a lot of stuff. I write every single day. So, this was one of those moments of thought and reflection. And I, typed it down quickly and then stored it away. But it's an interesting kind of view of where the world was when I wrote this. And I do feel to a degree that it actually is probably more accurate now than it was then. It's hard to be my age and not look back at the world from which I came and then compare it to the world in which I'm now living today. As I've said many times, I do feel that it is the job of a writer to consider all things, for different theories of life and living, and then they can write about them based on what they see happening in day-to-day life. Now, clearly, life has moved at a very swift pace since my youth, and the introduction of technology, as well as sort of a mindset within society, has grown away from what were considered the ideals of my generation, which is Generation X and the era of hippies and rockers and bikers and straights of the 1970s. For some time I've kind of looked at the world and not really liked what I see at times, as technology takes over and has kind of wormed its way into everything, and it feels a little unnatural and disturbing at times. Now, I'll freely admit I've never really embraced modern technology as willingly as maybe those who came a few generations after me have. And maybe that is because I was actually raised in a time when there was no technological link to every single person's life. Technology was, if anything, considered to be a futuristic thing, something in sci-fi novels and movies, not daily life. And so I did not really need it in order to get on with my own life at that time. I can remember when people first started to talk about the information superhighway. And, I would listen with interest as they talked of these things that would be free for everyone and grant them access to all of the knowledge of humanity. Now, from my point of view, I cannot deny, for a book geek and research fanatic like myself, thinking I could actually have access to everything that had ever been written and have it delivered through some form of portal in my home for free, well, that was very appealing. And yes, given the choice, I would happily live in a library. For me, a life of reading, research and writing things down does have actually a very powerful appeal, not just for myself, but also for my wife. For us, that would actually be utopia. The idea of an information superhighway was actually a really good one. But sadly, the utopian dream that preceded the internet was soon seized by corporate business. And today we have what I refer to as the digital sad, mad and the bad. And those are being, porn, social media and AI, which now pretty much dominate the whole of the internet. And it's all carefully controlled by big companies such as Microsoft and Apple, Google, Meta, and of course Amazon. Every one of them is offering a free service as promised, but it's soaked in adverts, and they're digitally data mining our information to sell to others for vast profits. We're watched, logged, and censored in all that we now do. And yet many of us still today call ourselves free. But in truth, are we? The truth is, nothing in this world is free. Well, maybe this channel is. I've got no intentions at all of monetizing this podcast. I suppose the biggest difference between the days of my youth and now are that back in the 1970s, all of the commodities that were for sale were actually in the shops on the local high street. And these days, everything now is online, even my books. Without online sellers, I would have no hope of selling a single page. And the biggest commodity for sale these days, believe it or not, is actually us. Because we have now become the product, as the major online platforms employ psychologists to watch everything that we do. And then, with the added assistance of AI, we are mapped, logged, recorded, and profiled on a minute-by-minute basis, so that, targeted adverts can be fired at us. And they play into our weakness in hope of parting us from our barely reasonable wages earned from working much longer hours than was, which actually was considered quite unreasonable 20 years ago. And yet, somehow, this system has worked, and we have simply complied as a race and fallen into the flow of compulsory living in a framed and manufactured system, just like workarounds. I'll admit freely, my children see me as some form of old, outdated conspiracy theorist, as I tell them constantly to be wary of what they post online. My son pretty much ignores me and has suffered endless hacks and has lost his social media accounts on a regular basis as others take them over and then spam his friends and acquaintances with porn and all sorts of vile comments. My daughter's not so bad. She does not want social media because she sees her friends and how they get bullied online, and she wants no part of that. I think she's more like her dad than she actually realizes, which, to be honest, gives me a great hope. I suppose at the end of the day, I've had far too many conversations with people under 30 in the last few years who live their entire lives around their online life. They're modeling themselves on social media influencers and copying their life in hope that they too will one day have all that their influencers have got, and not realizing that actually their idols are living a complete lie, and life is not quite as perfect and wonderful as the heavily edited videos that they get to watch on YouTube and TikTok. Most of these people who live this way have ended up at some point sat in my room talking of their sadness, their disappointment, and inability to cope with life, because it was so much harder than their influencer had led them to believe. I think this is kind of the problem of spending so much time working in counselling. I've now reached a point where I'm like, is it me? Or has the world become sadder and more bitter than ever before? I have to ask, is there anybody out there who can really say that they're truly happy today? As I wrote in Abigail Summer Part 1 of the Curio Chronicles, a great deal of the fakery of social media these days has slipped off the websites and into the real world as people have embraced their online personalities and taken it into the streets and into the clubs. I've spent many hours dealing with the casualties of this, as people have either suffered at the hands of what has become a world of trolls, or found the strain of keeping up appearances difficult and unfulfilling. I cannot count the times a person has asked me, is anyone real these days? Does anybody ever actually tell the truth? It is a really difficult question to answer. Because the truth is, we live in a world which never sleeps. Media is pumping out its rhetoric 24 hours a day. And the narrative is constantly changing. And I really do not think that people can keep up any longer at the sort of pace of life as it gets faster and faster. Trends come so quickly these days. No one really is on the ball. Currently, woke idealism rules. But for how much longer? As it's now being met with hate, and the narrative is once again changing. Our lives are in a constant state of flux. We get bombarded with all these messages about net zero, gender ideology, veganism, war, famine, adverse weather events. And everybody seems to be either on one side or the other. And everybody is fighting for something. What happened to peace, love and harmony? I'm in my late 50s and, I think I'm pretty well educated. And I have a reasonably good grasp on things. Possibly because I'm an avid reader and writer. There are even times when I sit back in my chair and I whisper, what the is happening? And it's true that people just don't read as much as they used to. We kind of created this world where everyone is now lazy. If it's not spoken to you and you can sit and listen, well, people are not going to pick up a book or a magazine or a newspaper and read it for themselves. They just listen to the news media or their favourite influencer or whatever, clickbait is on Facebook or whatever. They don't actually go and look for themselves, which was, kind of something that was part of my education. When we wanted a question answered, we were told, go look for it and learn. And usually that journey, that led us in this search for our answer for one thing, led us to many different avenues of other types of information. So instead of learning one thing, you learned a whole bunch of things. And it helped to educate you and prepare you better for life. The millennials and Gen Z, especially today, they get a lot of stick. But there are times when I cannot help thinking, how the hell do they cope with all of this? Especially Gen Z, because they've embraced tech into their lives in a way no other generation has. And yet they appear to be the biggest casualties in all of it. They appear unable to cope and are not sure how to live. They feel hopeless with no prospects for a future. And at the same time, they're falling ever deeper into the control and the manipulation of the media and big businesses through apps and more technological advances. To a degree, I do think that they are naive. But there again, I do think that education has failed them and not taught them properly how to cope. And to a degree, it's sold them some sort of fantasy idea of what life is like. And sadly, the truth is, life's not like that at all. Life can be really brutal at times. and that leaves them lost, isolated, and broken. In the autumn, I will be releasing the 4th book in the Curio Chronicles series, where the group have reached 28 and 29 years old. Now, if you've read the first 3, you'll know that in book 2, the Curios felt pretty much as I've just described. They felt lost and isolated, and they were trying their hardest to find a way to live a life true to their own values, living in a village that was ruled by old world conservatives who were pretty much hell-bent on controlling everything and getting rid of them. And, they did that by using dirty tricks and abusive language towards them. As a result, and in order to get their voices heard, the Curios used technology to build a website which they named Curio Life. And it's a platform that they really do not realize is going to strike a chord with a great many youth. Even they're unaware of the power of what they're actually building, although I think it's clear in the book that Ronnie does, as she understands what they build is actually an extension to the talk and the presentation that she gave to the village back in Abigail's summer. Through book 3, we see that the site grows at a rapid rate, and soon they have to increase the size of the server to cope with the demand as the site explodes worldwide. Now, in her wisdom, Birch, who now runs her own clinical practice, absorbs the site into her business, and she gets it registered as a charitable organisation, which brings in grants she can use to provide and care for those on the site who are suffering. At the start of book 4, you will see the culmination of all of the hard work of the Curios, as it does go global, and the book begins with Abigail making a presentation live on stage. That's about as much as you're going to get. I'm not going to give you any more heads up on the book. So, if you're triggered by that because you can't wait to read the book, sorry. But I've not really given anything away. But it does bring home a message that's massively important in today's world. And it is based on my own sort of research and my own time working with youth. Now, of course, the Curios, this is a fictional story, but it's something that I've thought about a great deal since I first wrote it, because in 2020, I actually stopped working in counselling to allow much more time for my writing life. But I still watch and I learn all of the news and the updates within the therapeutic industry, and I try to stay up to date with all of the surveys and all of the kind of data that comes down the pipe. Curio Life, the website, features yet again, in this new 4th book, which is going to be released later this year. And, the primary reason it does is simply because I really felt at the time of writing this book, which was, back in 2020, it was really important to understand the youth of the world and the troubles that they face. And, the Curios is supposed to be a modern, contemporary, slice of life story about youth. So obviously I wanted to add this in there. Now, back in 2020, the figure that was quoted for young adults taking their own life in the UK stood around 5,000 a year. And here we are now, 3 years later, and actually it has risen a great deal more. It's hard to see figures like that and not feel some form of concern. And I cannot deny, it does lead me to many, many questions, such as, what actually is causing this? I really do not think that there is actually one particular reason. I do feel that it's a combination of many things, such as media, fakery, lies, deception, definitely bad education, and especially a global obsession with wealth and celebrity culture. I somehow feel like the world has become one big fantasy novel, And it's most definitely not grounded in any form of reality. To be honest, most of what I've talked about today, 3 years ago, I actually worked into the books that became the series of the Curio Chronicles. This podcast is just really scratching the surface as the books deal with many of the issues and a lot more over the full series, which is also the life story of Abigail Watson, who is the lead character. The fourth book in many ways is kind of like the turning point as Abby starts to move away from the negatives of her youth and the harsh lessons that she's had to learn into a more stable part of her life. And it shows how she adapts and begins to embrace the truth of who she really is, with some surprising results. This book once again will test her to the core. But the one thing that is very different is that Abby starts to realize who she really is and who she actually wants to be. And I think, that is a massively important aspect of the whole series. And it's very relevant to the youth of today. Because I do feel, having worked with so many over the years, that they do lack the ability to fully understand who they are. And in doing so, then, make changes in their lives so that they can actually be who they want to be. I think the message is clear. When you live in a world of fakery, being real is actually a rebellious act. But it's also the formula for recovery. I think one of the biggest lies of the modern world today is that we all have to embrace the system, and we either fit in or we become outcast. A great deal of this is a part of what I call the sleeping world. If you look at today, the way the media and big business manipulate everything for their own self-gain by actually manipulating all of the people who are blindly following society, and what is seen as a normal life is just another exercise in conformity. As a writer, I think my Generation X credentials really are now starting to show, because my generation did not care about conformity, and we feared nothing. We actually embraced risk, and I've watched as society has beaten that out of each generation to try and achieve some form of control through online conditioning. Now, to me, it's all like the emperor's new clothes again, as I see right through the scam of what is, a so-called society of rules and conditions. And so I've chosen to write alternative ideas and ways of living that are more focused on embracing the individual, not the collective. Now, I get it. This is just the rantings of, some old bloke who just happens to be a writer. But, from my point of view, I'm starting to sound like my kids. From my point of view, and for me personally, I find a lot of modern culture to be completely and utterly unnatural. Because what I see in my longer years is freedoms are being taken away slowly as the wealthy push for greater gains and more control, using shame and victimization, as the tools of compliance. The internet is an absolutely amazing thing. It is actually everything that I was told it would be. But the problem is that most people are unaware of its massive potential for personal growth, because they've been sold the idea that they must conform, use social media, follow every trend, and believe all of the dogma that supports sales through advertising and reduces people's free will. My biggest problem with social media is all of the trolls and the so-called gurus who spout utter tosh on an hourly basis. Everyone, today is a bloody expert, offering their opinions as if they are, the chosen ones, and we should blindly believe every word that dribbles from their frothing mouths of exuberance. I can remember that in my youth. We called the groups who built up around those kinds of people cults, and we did not fall for their lies. And yet today we spoon feed ourselves all of the same garbage, but we call it truth. I find so much of it so tiresome. There's hardly any truth on social media at all. It's too filled with exhibitionists and sociopaths who insist you follow them into this new utopia, which, if I'm absolutely honest, I think it looks a little bit too much like some form of slavery for my liking. Life is not about going with the crowd. It's actually, I personally think it's actually about being brave enough to walk against it and understand the real merit and value of truth and the ability to actually think for yourself. A good life is about experiencing and learning about who you actually are as a person. And yes, that may mean stepping out of your comfort zone like Abigail does around Birch in the Curio Chronicles, or Emily does as she faces the reality of her life without her grandma Hannah. Life's not meant to be fun all of the time. It can be painful and hard, but that is actually how we learn, just as Morgana does in the Countess of Darkness. Or, it's about feeling the true pain of loss. As Branna loses Ariel when she runs from the castle. We're told that we must plug in and play on our devices, update our status on social media each hour, and record our life forever on TikTok. But why? What purpose does it serve, apart from giving important data to the companies who run those apps? Writing, I'm happy, and then hitting enter, is not actually the truth. It does not even make you happy. Talking to a loved one, a hug, a soft kiss, that smile in a stolen moment, or watching your kids laugh with joy, those are the ingredients of true happiness. Not tapping on a keyboard alone in a room that you've not left for days. One of my first stories is set in a woodland disconnected from all tech, in a world destroyed by modern man. I think in many ways, as my first foray into writing, Heirs to the Kingdom painted the picture of turning one's back on the modern world and embracing life by walking back towards nature. Maybe I wrote it because I see myself very much in this light, because I do reject a great deal of the modern online world and all of its trends and ideas and how all of us should live. Today's world is very divided, which again I think confuses a great many, as we now have reached this point in life where one side is always right, no matter how much they mutilate the facts, and the other is always wrong. You're either right wing or left wing. And I, to be honest, personally, I feel no attachment to either side. I listen to everybody's point of view and then I decide for myself. It's called free thinking. I actually think both sides push a narrative of some form of self-hatred. And I'm actually happy being me and pointing out the obvious in the books that I write. Over the last 30 years of my life, I feel I've moved much closer to nature and what is natural, and I personally have found a great sense of self within that. And now I get it, it works for me, and that is all that really matters to me. And I would say that it's also a key to life. Simply choose you, stop listening to the pack, which again is one of the central themes of the Curio Chronicles, and I may add, also Heirs to the Kingdom. It has always fascinated me to know that the odds of being born into this world are actually billions to one. So, if you actually take a step back and you look at life that way, every single human being on this planet has currently beaten some pretty bloody amazing odds. And they are actually, every one of them is a living miracle. Now if you consider that, then following the pack and conforming to everything no matter what, even if it breeds self-doubt and feelings of worthlessness and depression, is actually a path of utter stupidity. Ronnie's speech at the end of Abigail's Summer is something that I'm actually really proud of as a writer. I spent a huge amount of time carefully crafting this whole chapter together as I went through and I very gently picked each word and how it related to the rest of the text. In her own words, she actually says, "You know who I am now. So my question tonight is, who are you?" Behind her, the same words appeared in big letters on the screen. Veronica walked back to the table, sat on it, and faced the crowd. She lifted her glass and took a sip. Her voice was soft and gentle, but easily heard through the PA system. That is a question that I've asked every day in my practice back in Manchester. And over the years, I have found it is also one of the most difficult for people to answer. You see, the problem is, we all know what we like and what we feel, but in many cases we're so afraid of being exposed. We hide from our feelings, hide what we like, and we never really reveal our truth. Few have the power to cast off their doubts, because the majority all live by those terrible 4 words that can destroy your life. The words appeared in large letters on the screen. What will people say? She smiled at the audience. I see you're all there already, living in dread, because you know how powerful those 4 words can be. Would you like to know what I tell my clients? Because I have 4 words that I always respond with. Does it really matter? I feel it is actually one of the most important moments in the whole of the book, and I wrote it deliberately to make every reader just stop for a moment and think. Because the simple truth is, there is one world, and yet there are a billion different ways to live on it. And regardless of what other people may say, the life that you live is actually your own, and you can choose to live any way that you wish to, as long as you do not harm any other. Plugging into tech and blindly following the crowd is but only one way, and that is the way the media and big business would prefer you to live, because that actually suits their profits better. As a human being, you have a choice. You can blindly believe everything you are told and follow the crowd, or you can sit back and think, and then choose something that is more fitting to who you actually are. And if you're not sure, put down your tech and actually experience life for a while, and make connections in person with others. Think things through. Ask yourself how you really do feel deep down about all of the stuff that you see, and then form your own opinion of things, instead of simply believing everything you've been told on social media. You'll soon find out who belongs and who should not be in your life. I write about the latter because I honestly believe it's actually a much better thing for humanity. I feel we already praise money far too highly in society, and our obsessions with celebrities and influencers is actually very, very unhealthy, as it breeds impossible expectations. Now, I get it. I may be old, but I guess the thing I love the most about my generation is that we all saw each other as individuals. We all had our own personalities, different belief systems. We used to have opposite opinions, and yet we all got on really well, and we treasured the friendships that we had. It was okay to, not be quite the same when I was young. It was fine to be an individual, and no one really forced us to follow a crowd if we did not wish to. Governments and business allowed us to be simply us and did not dictate our likes or our tastes. And I suppose what I'm actually saying is that, what we actually created as a generation was uniqueness, individuality, and a powerful sense of self-assurance. And I grew up that way, and I really liked it. I feel today it is, hard to really separate the crowd as they're all starting to look and sound the same, which I actually do find a little bit disturbing. Since my youth, there are far too many new rules to society and way too many businesses dictating the terms and conditions of our lives. And it bothers me that no one appears to actually rebel against this constant onslaught of control. Everyone just freely accepts it. I guess my generation were rebels to the core, and even though we're old, we still are. And maybe that is a good thing, because we could be the last generation to truly understand what freedom is. And so, we're capable of writing about it in the hope that others realize before it's too late. The whole world conforms, to the level of countries like China, which is actually a really chilling thought. Ultimately, at the end of life, we will ask ourselves, did we live a good, fulfilling life? I think Abby and Birch will probably say yes, because they did. They lived by one philosophy, and I feel that I too live by that as well, which is clearly stated once again by Ronnie in her speech. And her statement simply was, be you and then appreciate each other. Thank you for listening today. I hope you enjoyed that. I think there's a lot in there to unpack and there's a lot to think about, but that's kind of the point of the books that I write. I really enjoyed putting this week's episode together. If you do enjoy what you're hearing, please, like the video and subscribe if you already haven't, which will give me a chance, to broaden the reach of this, even though I'm not a big fan of tech, as I've just stated. I need a little bit of tech assistance to get the viral reach a lot further, so I can get a lot more people listening in and hopefully enjoying the things that I talk about. Thank you very much for tuning in today and listening to this podcast, and I will be back next week with something completely different. I'm working on a few things behind the scenes, and hopefully, over the coming months, we'll be able to kind of once again lift the level of this podcast and bring in a few other different ideas. So until next week, have a fun week, stay safe, enjoy the weather if it's nice, and discover who you are and smile more.
Thanks for listening to the Writer Life podcast. If you have enjoyed this episode, or there are areas of Robin's stories you would like him to discuss, please add your thoughts and questions in the comments, and we will include them in a future episode. You can follow Robin on all his social media links, which you will find listed below, and please, like and subscribe to this channel, so you get the latest notifications when he posts. All Robin's books are available in digital and print formats to purchase or download through all online book sales sites.